Okay, folks, so today we're talking about Aniara, which is originally a Swedish epic poem. And so our guest today is going to read some of the opening here in the original Swedish. Just to be clear, this is not a Swedish episode, so if you don't understand what you're about to hear, just hold on, we'll explain it. Max, take it away.
Mitt första möte med min Doris lyser, med ljus som kan försköna själva ljuset. Men låt mig enkelt säga att mitt första och lika enkla möte med min Doris nu är en bild som var och en kan se framför sig varje dag i alla hallar som slussar flyktingar till startområdet för nödutfärderna till tundreklotet. I dessa år då jorden nått därhän att hon för strålförgiftnings skull beredes en tid av vila, ro och karantän.
There we go. And that's and in the translation that we have of that, I'll read. And I'm sure it has its limitations, which we'll get into. My first meeting with my Doris beams, with light to make the light itself more fair. But let me simply say about my first and just as simple meeting with my Doris that now it forms a picture all can see every day before them in all the halls, sluicing refugees to lift-off zones for urgent excursions to the tundra sphere, these present years when Earth became unclean, with toxic radiation is accorded, a time of calm repose and quarantine.
I love going to the tundra sphere of a winter.
I'm always doing that.
You're now listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.
Welcome to the Socialist Shelf. We are here with our first episode where we're talking about a Swedish author. We're talking about Aniara here today, Harry Martinson. And to do that, we have brought on Max Johansson. Max, welcome to the show.
Thank you. So this is actually not just a Swedish work, but it's from the same region of Sweden as me.
Fantastic. And what
So
region is
I
that?
have kind of a local connection to not so much this specific work, but to this author.
What's the region of Sweden that this is from?
So this is Blekinge, which is one of the smallest one of the smallest traditional regions of Sweden. It is in the southeast corner of the country, right on the Baltic coast. If you've ever, I mean, if you've played Disco Elysium and gone to the western half of the map, that's basically what most of this part of the country looks like.
Fair enough. Well, Max hosts the Broadrofokens pod, and I'm sure my pronunciation is limited there, which is that's essentially it's the grown men Googling things together category is I think how you describe it. You want to tell folks a
Yeah,
little bit about what you do here?
that's how we sort of half jokingly describe the concept. So it's me and two of my friends. We live in three completely different parts of the Nordic region. I live in the south of Sweden. My co-host Alvin lives in the north of Sweden, and then our other co-host Grime is in Bergen in Norway.
Mm.
And basically, the concept of the podcast is we do, theoretically at least, we do sort of comparative politics and look at what's going on in the different countries of the region.
Makes sense.
So like
So
current
it's
events.
yeah, I hate to compare it to Chapo Trap House, but it's not 100 miles away in terms of concept, but with the added sort of twist that, of course, we speak two different languages.
Okay.
That makes sense. Nordic Chapo. Uh,
Yeah.
very cool, very cool. Well, you know, you were the one who pitched this specific text. I'm curious, Aniara is something that I had no familiarity with. First of all, I'm curious, Lenore, any connection from you to this work prior to this?
Oh, none, none. No, Harry Martinson is totally new to me this week, which is which is why it's very funny. Like, when I start in with the bio, Max, feel free to hop in and fill in any blanks
Yeah.
that I've got because I'm sure there will be many. But yeah, there's a film of this that I understand, Jacob, you saw.
Yeah, and I'll talk about it a little bit. I'm not as interested in it. It's interesting,
Yeah.
but it's its own thing.
There's a film and there's also an opera,
Hmm. The
which I
opera
think is the
came out,
most I
yeah.
think is the most logical way to adapt this.
If there's gonna be an
Honestly.
adaptation, yeah, the spirit of
Um,
this weird thing.
but
But
the opera came
yeah.
out in, I want to say, 1960. Oh no,
Hmm.
59 actually. So just shortly after the actual poem.
Well,
And
Max,
it's
what made
all
you interested in talking about this?
so the specific thing that made me want to talk about this now is that so this summer I had a temp job working in social care. And that's a job that is very intense in some ways, but also has a lot of dead time. And I decided to start reading this thing on my breaks
Gotcha.
because poetry makes sense to read that way, I think.
In
And
sort of
also,
bite-sized.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I sort of it was causing me a little bit of shame that I hadn't actually read it previously, despite having known of both this author and this work being one of the most significant one of the most significant science fiction works ever written in the Swedish language, I still somehow hadn't gotten around to it, and obviously there is a lot in this thing to discuss.
No doubt.
So
Yeah, I feel like for the current, obviously it's written in the 50s in this like context of like the nuclear age and whatnot, but I feel like there's a lot of like relatability, especially with
yeah,
other things like climate and hell, it's not like we're out of the nuclear tunnel yet either,
no.
by
I
any
mean, I
stretch.
think I actually, at the time, I had the idea to pitch this to you guys as having done an episode on Poe and an episode on Kim Stanley Robinson. This is kind of the missing link between those two.
Yeah. That's that's actually a great description of it. Um,
Yeah.
That does make a lot of sense, right? Because you have that consciousness of our responsibility as stewards of our environment, of emerging world-shaking technologies, in energy and in weaponry,
Yeah.
You have that consciousness from the Kim Stanley Robinson, and then you have the poetry, of course. You have the weird little guy factor from Edgar
Gotta
Yeah.
have the weird
Poe.
little guy factor. That's a socialist shelf staple when we're talking
But
about
but I
office.
mean, not to reduce it not to reduce it to the catchphrase, but he has a certain pessimism about him shot through this text, which I find
Yes.
fascinating.
I
Yes,
think that's a
absolutely.
great link to establish because he has a lot of the like vibes of Poe. There's a sort of sciency-ness that's, not hard science, but sciencey-ness that there's a Kim Stanley Robinson sort of modern thing going on. And similar to both of them, I think he has this uh great instinct towards what we need to be pursuing as like maybe a society with like when you read about the guy some like questions about the total coherence of his politics but like
Yeah.
not necessarily of his
Yeah.
character but we'll see. Lenore, I know you've got the bio on this guy, so let's talk about Martinson. Lenore, tell us about Harry Martinson.
Yeah, so he was born Harry Edmund Olafsson. He changed his name to Martinson later, as I understand it.
Yeah, so actually, so he was born in 1904,
Hmm.
and the law that required all families to adopt surnames came through in, I believe, 1906.
Oh, I had
Oh,
no idea. Oh,
So
that's so
his
cool.
original name was a patronymic.
Got you, got you. And then they swap over to
His dad's patronymic, yeah.
Gotcha.
It was the just the standard back then, just solo name, like you're just Beyonce or Rihanna,
No,
like
so it's kind of a mixed bag actually. But until sort of the early modern period, unless you were part of a noble family, and even then, you would have your first name and then your dad's name with like son or daughter at the end.
got it.
Which is why even today most or a lot, I should say, of Nordic names end in son or sen.
Makes sense.
But so generally, if you were uh, if like you wanted to signal that you were an important person, you would choose a family name and adopt that. But it
Mm,
was not actually a legal requirement to do so until the beginning of the 20th century.
Wow.
makes
And
sense.
by that point, the people who didn't were mostly poor, mostly rural, and mostly in the south of the country.
Hmm.
And of course, as I'm sure we're about to get into, Martinson was all three of those.
Oh
Yep.
yes. Yeah.
This
Yeah.
has been the Swedish surname corner.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's fascinating just how like recently in the historical scale like these changes are that we take for granted these days.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, in the Nordic region especially,
mm, yeah.
like there's a lot about this guy's life that that would give the average Bernie Sanders voter a heart attack,
Oh, well, yeah, we'll get into that.
if I put it that way.
So yeah, he
Um,
shares his birthday the 6th of May with Maximilian Robespierre, which I find neither here nor there, but slightly ironic, I think, given his sort of political leanings. Um,
yeah.
his family ran a country store. Is that like a general store?
Yeah, basically. So his dad was this kind of, I mean, he was like this known scoundrel
Hmm.
around the area. Apparently, he'd spent a few years living in Australia
Really? By
under
choice?
under the name Reginald Sterling. Yeah.
The Adventures of
Uh,
Reginald Starling.
I don't know why he picked that name, but he did, and but he came back. So I think he was there for like a couple of years in the 1890s.
Mm,
Okay.
And he came back, married a local woman, and had six kids.
as
Yes.
one does.
Uh,
As one
yeah,
as one
as
does.
one did back then,
Yeah,
certainly.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, he was what I was able to find on Martin, the father, was that he wasn't a very stable guy. He was prone to violent outbursts. He also proved to be prone to dying of tuberculosis shortly after coming home from
yeah.
a
He
stint in
loved to do
jail.
that.
Yeah.
Always doing that. This is in 1910 now when Harry was 6.
Yes.
His mother Betty went bankrupt that same year.
Yeah.
And the following year she
Uh,
moves to Portland, Oregon, never sees her
yeah.
kids
She
again.
she fucks off and leaves her kids behind.
Mm. Again,
And
as one does.
yeah, and this leads to the first sort of insane moment in his life. I don't know if you came across this, Lenore, but basically the way that the care of orphans worked, unless you lived somewhere that had an orphanage, which was basically just the cities, you would fall into the care of the local parish,
Mm.
and they would actually auction you off.
The hell? Just like as farm
Yeah,
labor or whatever?
yeah, basically. Except instead of like they weren't selling you in that sense, but rather the auction went to whichever family promised to accept the lowest amount of child support.
Mm. I see.
This was a great system with no flaws.
We used to have something similar here. It was colloquially referred to as like the orphan trains, right? Like,
Yeah,
very often, like kids with no family, homeless kids. Sometimes also like kids who had family in the area, but who like just couldn't like if there was a language barrier or something like the kids of immigrants would get caught up in this as well and just like shipped off north and
Yeah.
very frequently end up as farm labor.
Of course, that's when we
Yeah.
had child support at all.
Yeah. Fucking
Dark,
hell,
dark,
yeah.
dark.
So for a few years, like he's bopping around foster homes. Some
Yes, I think he lived on like 5 or 6 different farms through his childhood.
Oh wow. And how many of these did he run away from?
Uh, I want to say 3.
Hmm.
I think, no, actually, it might just have been 2 because the third time he ran away was later in his childhood when he became a child soldier.
Oh, I missed the child soldiery.
Yes. These are the 2 things that I wanted to shock you guys with. Uh, the fact that he was auctioned off and then became a child soldier.
Yeah, let's get into that.
Uh,
What war?
So
Where?
I do want to say at first that so the period when he was living on farms, he was I mean he had an extremely unstable life.
Yeah,
But
naturally.
the one thing he really enjoyed was going to school.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And he would apparently, according to one thing I read, he would refer to coming to school in the morning as coming home, and
It's
leaving
actually
as
really
going
sweet.
away.
Mm. That's actually like really charming aside from the going away part.
And one of the reasons I mentioned this is that during uh, my brief time in the scouting movement, I actually spent a night in the schoolhouse
Oh wow.
where he went to school.
Oh, that's so cool.
They
Very
have
cool.
like, or at least they had in 2005, like a small sort of exhibit about his life.
That's super
And
cool.
as I understand it, the schoolhouse is now like some kind of community space. This being a village of like 20 people.
Mm.
I feel like he'd want I'd feel like he'd want it serving that purpose.
Yeah.
Always nice.
Yeah.
So he's got a community space and an exoplanet named after him. Very
Mhm.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for a few years, like he's doing the foster home circuit. Around 1919, I saw that he got a job at a cotton mill. Was that before or after he was a soldier?
I don't know. Because I think this is also in 1919. Because so the specific thing that I refer to as being a child soldier is the Swedish Navy at this time. I believe it was abolished around World War II. Had an auxiliary organization for boys
Mm.
Okay.
that you could join from the age of 15.
So this is when he runs away to sea.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Or not exactly, actually. Because so he comes to Karlskrona, which is where the Swedish Navy, or a substantial part of the Swedish Navy, is based, and also where I currently am. At the age of 15, um, having been apparently released from his foster home, and also having actually quite a while ago left school. I think he only had something like 4 years of schooling.
Hmm. Yeah, four's all you need at that time.
How do you or did he see combat at any point? I guess that would be
No,
between the
no,
big
no, no, he did
wars.
not. So he, or like, I guess it depends how you like what you classify as combat, because he joined this organization, and as with so many other sort of institutions for teenage boys at this time, there was quite a lot of like peer abuse and bullying going on.
Sure, he definitely
Uh,
saw a rough time.
yes, so he immediately found himself at the absolute rock bottom of the pecking order.
Right. He wasn't in
Um,
the trenches or anything though, but he
no,
was
no, no. Like
definitely
Sweden wasn't in either World War.
sure. I have to
Um,
imagine though, like as a kid who's like, I'm coming home when I go to the schoolhouse, you show up in the Navy, like, yeah, you're immediately getting a wedgie. No
yeah,
doubt.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And so after I think a couple of weeks in the service, he deserts.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
He
And
seems to like doing
he
that.
yes, like the one recurring theme in Harry Martinson's life from beginning to end is that this guy just loves running away.
Mhm.
And so
He seems to be efficient at it, so
yeah, I mean somehow he is able to get, I want to say something like 200 or 300 miles away before anyone catches him, and this is despite the fact that he had no clothes of his own when he ran away.
fantastic.
So like he was walking the countryside in like a sailor jacket, and it somehow took them several. I mean, it must have been like several weeks to find him.
Hey, if you look like you're supposed to be somewhere, nobody questions you.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't think he
exactly.
did look like he was supposed to be somewhere. So what
I'm not
happens
sure
next?
I'm not sure he looked like he was supposed to be anywhere.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah, they did find him. They threw him in the brig, and then once he'd served his sentence, he was drummed out.
mhm.
And I believe after that is when he went to Gothenburg and signed on to a merchant ship.
Yes, and he spends 7 years aboard 19 different cargo ships, I'm told.
Yeah.
Working as he's a deckhand, he's a fireman, he's a coal stoker, he's a coal trimmer. Coal trimmer is new to me. Like that's the guy who makes sure like coal is distributed evenly so the ship doesn't like list.
Makes
Yeah.
Um,
sense.
and this part of his life comes to an end in 1927 when he gets tuberculosis, which is not uncommon for sailors who work in coal. But this time he beats it. But he's
Yeah.
done sailing for now, and he's just turned 23.
I like tuberculosis patients who don't die.
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah, just
Yeah,
telling
so
his deadbeat dad, "Fuck you. You died of this. I lived. I'm built different." Yeah,
and he
no
does
yeah,
this
doubt.
exactly.
multiple times.
Phenomenal.
So he makes his living on the road for a couple of years, working odd jobs and begging. And after he returns to Sweden, in 1927, he meets Helga Johansson, known as Moa.
Yes. And I think at least from your perspective, she is substantially cooler than he is.
Yeah, she's certainly got more experience in the labor journalism scene that they both fall into.
Yeah,
As
yeah, like she is um so she is a writer, a feminist, an increasingly dyed-in-the-wool communist over the course of the 1930s.
Yeah.
And a very significant figure in her own right in something I think should be mentioned when discussing Harry Martinson, even though he was kind of on the fringes of it in terms of his actual output, which is the proletarian literature movement.
Mhm.
hmm Well, she was in my limited reading on this. I didn't do the full deep dive, but she was a writer for Brand, which was a sort of syndicalist um,
Yes.
journal, and I
Um,
think potentially named after the Ibsen play.
it
Um,
would not surprise me. It just means fire.
yeah,
Mhm.
I think that when I looked
Um,
into it briefly, it seemed like it was like there was like a connection or whatever.
yeah, no,
Which is
I mean,
because Brand is voice
Ibsen at
crying
least
out.
at times of his life called himself an anarchist. So,
Mhm.
But I was interesting that
uh,
it's interesting connection since we did Peer Gynt a couple months
yeah, yeah,
ago.
yeah. No, I listened to that one.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
But yeah, so they make that connection. I know that was an ill-fated marriage, but they were married for a little while, yeah.
Yeah, they
Yes, they
marry
were.
they marry in 29, yeah, and that lasts for a little over a decade. Now, he makes his literary debut, Martinson does, that same year with the poetry collection
Berquep.
Spookwep.
Yeah.
Okay, or Ghost
Uh,
Ship. And it's inspired by his experiences at sea. It's heavily influenced by Rudyard Kipling, and Dan Anderson, who is another Swedish writer in the
yes.
proletarian tradition.
Who is incredible. Um, I don't think a good translation of his poems exists.
Mhm.
Mhm.
But on the off chance that anyone listening to this podcast reads Swedish, you should read him. There are also a lot of really great musical adaptations of his poetry.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, he is. I mean, he is kind of a similar character in some ways. He also grew up dirt poor in the middle of the woods. And he also uh, he also spent a lot of his life living in cities and desperately wanting to go back.
Mm.
And he died in sometime in the 20s, at the age of 30, when he was on a trip to Stockholm to meet his publisher. And when he booked himself at like one of the cheapest hotels in town, um, they had just fumigated the room he was staying in
Right.
and not aired it out properly. So he asphyxiated in his sleep.
Oh my God.
Jesus. Dark stuff. Really, you
Yes.
could just die of whatever back then.
Yeah, truly.
It
Yeah.
was wild. Lenore, tell me, is how was this original poetry collection received? Like, is he
Uh,
making money at this time writing, or is
uh,
he still begging or living off his
N-
wife?
yeah,
Not a
not
whole.
much, I don't think.
Yeah, not a whole hell of a lot. He doesn't. Well, he gains recognition like that year. After he publishes the anthology Femunga. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, close enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Femunga is like a poetry, an anthology slash manifesto
Mm-hmm.
that is published by a group of 5 young men, which is what the title translates to,
Hmm.
who are um, who are interested in um, like poetic modernism.
Gotcha.
Uh,
Basically responsible for introducing modernism to Sweden's literary scene. Do I have that right?
uh, I think so, yeah, to a large extent.
Hmm.
And there was a lot of movement from below in Swedish literature at this time,
Yeah.
which connects to the proletarian movement. But the proletarian writers are kind of always split between like a strictly realist side and a more experimental modernist side.
Hmm.
And
I
a large part of the reason why the marriage of Harry and Moa was so strained is that they were on opposite sides of this argument.
Right. Right. I think it's like worth noting, when we're talking about the proletarian literature movement. I know there's obviously a specific Swedish context, but all across Europe and the United States, though,
Hmm.
I think
Yeah,
Europe
yeah,
was more self-conscious at the time. Um, there is this idea of, a from the bottom literary movement that is opposed to the classic idea of like literature as an upper class thing, as a domain
yeah,
of the upper class. And I think a large part of that is just materially, obviously, higher rates of literacy, cheaper access to things like paper and whatnot as
yeah,
production increased. And I think also there was a conscious effort at that time from Soviet Union, but also from like people that were sympathetic across Europe to try
yeah,
to make that push. I know there was like art projects that were specifically like half half internally like we're gonna write stuff, but half propaganda towards Europe that the Soviet Union's doing at that time.
yeah,
Actually,
yeah,
Black
yeah, absolutely.
Bolshevik briefly talks about that, like as Haywood kind of knocks up against some of these figures that are like almost propaganda poets or whatever. That's like, hey, look what we're doing from like this random farmer or whatever. So even people that are like Martinson, who's not necessarily gonna be like the most pro-Soviet guy in the world are gonna like be adjacent to that and are gonna be sympathetic to that argument because and obviously
Yeah.
that's something anybody should be able to agree with no matter ideology. Of course lower classes should bring poetry. Have you ever written poetry written by like super rich guy who's never interacted with the world?
Yeah,
Very
no.
often it's incredibly eye-rolling and it's like part of the reason that there's stereotypes about poetry in the first place.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
For sure, for
So
sure. And I
important context given
So
the name
actually,
of this show.
since you mention the Soviet Union's role in all of this, in 1934, there was some kind of big international literary congress in Moscow,
Yeah.
and both of the Martinsons went and came away with essentially opposite impressions.
Yeah.
Like
mm,
she loved it and thought it was incredibly cool that like the workers were building a new kind of society,
Hmm.
and would over the next few years become like further and further away from anarchism and towards like Soviet-style Marxism-Leninism.
Mm.
Whereas he was horrified by basically everything he saw. And I think that that terror he felt visiting the Soviet Union in the 30s feeds directly into Aniara.
Yeah, I think like also you look like I reading like the intro, right, to my edition. It talks about part of the specific reason he's horrified, right? Because it's not just like, the specifics of he didn't like the poetry he read there. It was like at the top you have this very dramatic I think there was already like he was worried about some cult of personality stuff or whatever, but there was also this drive like you have at the top like this quote about like writers from Lenin like being about like writers being like the engine of society and you already and like architects of the human mind and Martinson
Yeah.
already is like, well, that actually is clashing with his like vision of more abstract,
Yeah.
more, like we said, there were these, I mean, you already
Yeah, I
identified,
think
there are these
he
opposite ideas of like realism versus this sort of modernism. And I think
yeah.
that bothered him in a specific way.
And I think even more than that, there was just he just had a fundamental sense, which I think is perfectly understandable given his upbringing, that he really, really didn't want to be used by anyone.
Sure, sure. And he felt like,
Even if it was for a good purpose.
yeah, because you're part of the, I mean, we just identified it. They were using these poets as like propaganda arm and like, towards a
Yeah.
proletarian means, but you're still part of that. And this is something that he's run away from because of his
Yeah.
experiences versus, Moa is saying this and she's like, well, you know, this is the workers' movement at work. This is a way to
Yeah.
use my writing as a weapon. And you can see, given both of their backgrounds, how they come to those sort of conclusions and can be
Yeah,
sympathetic to
absolutely.
both of them, however you feel about it.
Well, it's also very, very awkward, I feel, because they are invited to the All-Union Congress of Soviet Writers literally right after Harry's confessed to being unfaithful in the marriage.
Ooh.
So like there's a lot of tension there. He's actually like earlier that year I read like he just disappeared without telling his wife.
Yes, he did that a couple of times.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
loves to run away.
And in a very like
Yes.
ugly and public affair, like colleagues and friends are keeping them in contact,
Harry
like just like
Martinson, noted
middlemaning.
drapetomania sufferer.
Yeah.
I think it's worth noting here, and look, I'm not excusing anything. Harry Martinson was a certified baddie. Like as a young man, he is a good looking fellow, which is
Yeah, sure.
he is my I could fix him character of the week.
Well, and
The
and
author for the first time, it is the author.
well, and on the subject of like fixing like temporarily, like what brings him back at one of these points I find is that like his wife writes to him and is like, "Look, I have here you left behind the manuscript for your second novel. Like I'm gonna burn it
Oh
unless you bring
God,
it back, unless you come back." And he's back next week.
my like gut
Yeah.
just dropped when I heard that. Holy shit.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
How are you
Yeah.
going to cheat on your
And
wife
so-
and leave your novel manuscript like in the God?
Yeah, and this so his second novel is probably, aside from Aniara, his most important work.
What is that?
So this is the novel Nässlorna blomma, or Flowering Nettles, in English, which is a sort of, I guess today we would call it autofiction.
Okay. Is it science fiction at all, or is there any connection to that?
No. Like Aniara is, I think, the one thing he writes in that genre, really.
Okay.
So
he just is like, I'm gonna hit it out of the park once and then never do it again.
basically,
I
but
respect that.
yeah. So Flowering Nettle is, I mean, it is mostly a realist novel.
Mm,
And I think a lot of what he wrote in the 30s, I don't know if this was inspired by his wife or if it was just the way things were at the time.
sure.
But a
As
lot
was
of
the
what he
style at the
writes at
time.
that time was more realist.
Gotcha.
And so Flowering Nettles is about a child named Martin whose dad dies and his mother fucks off to the US. And he is forced to spend his childhood moving between different farms. And this
Right,
novel
what you
has,
know.
yeah. And this novel is, I mean, obviously pretty closely based on his actual experiences, along with the sequel that he wrote. So Flowering Nettle came out in 35, and in 36 he published a sequel called The Way Out,
Very cool.
which is about his teenage years and his attempts to find a way out of poverty. And these novels are very well received and widely read. And I think basically they are what kind of set him up for life as a writer.
Sure.
Cool.
And so is that kind of the link that over those next few years as he leaves MOA and is on his own, what's happening there? Because, you know.
So one thing he actually does, and I don't know too many details about this, is that in 1939, after he's separated but before they've been formally divorced, Harry goes to Finland to fight as a volunteer in the Winter War.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So he spends a couple of months there.
As a mail carrier, as I understand.
Yeah. That sounds right. Yeah.
Mhm.
I don't think he would have been good in combat.
No, he's had tuberculosis again by this time.
Wow.
Yeah. 2:04 a.m. going back for more tuberculosis.
But yeah, but like so, by this time, of course, he and Moa are like really done. She's like, dude, like you're unfaithful in your marriage, you're unserious in your politics. Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
But he meets and marries another woman during the war, Ingrid Lindkrantz, and they have two daughters.
Yes, and they stay married for the rest of his life.
Gotcha.
I don't know too much about her. Like she was not a public figure in the way that Moa was.
Sure.
But as I understand it, she was nonetheless an important figure in his writing and helped him a lot with like editing and like just being an early audience for his work.
Okay.
Because what Martinson does in the post-war era is actually honestly kind of similar to like how Tolkien treated writing at the end of his life. Like he was just constantly he was just constantly making drafts of things.
Yeah.
And only a tiny fraction of what he wrote ever saw the light of day.
Doing his cycle,
wow.
yeah.
Which is why he is, in terms of publication, not very prolific.
So are we still finding like papers of his like in recent years?
I don't know. I don't recall any specific incident of that. But like the way he died, we'll get into that. But it would not surprise me if his wife burned all his letters at that point.
Oh wow.
Sure.
Yeah.
I can't speak. I won't. Gun to my head, I won't definitively say that, but it's the sort of thing that would make sense.
Sure.
So the war goes on. He develops his interest in science, the natural world. He actually attends a nuclear fission experiment in Copenhagen in 41.
Yeah. Yeah. So another really big part of his writing that is not too heavily discussed is that in the late 30s he writes a series of like non-fiction prose books about nature. Which is something he sort of goes back to a few times later in his life. And that's
the scientific element.
Yeah, like in terms of volume, that's probably the largest part of his work.
Interesting.
Gotcha.
And they're quite well read, and they are cited. So I'm getting ahead of myself now, but in 1974 he gets the Nobel Prize.
Right.
Yes.
And the motivation for that is that he's given the prize, quote, for writings that catch the dewdrop and reflect the cosmos. And I think that has to be a reference to A, the nature books, and B, Aniara.
Sure.
Oh, 100%. That's so cool. That sums up really well.
Love the line.
Yeah.
Though not everyone
we'll
loved
get into the
reception.
circumstances of his Nobel Prize.
Yeah, I was going to say not everyone loved the reception of him getting it, but we do love that description.
So
what brings him to Aniara?
So 13th of October 1956 is when he publishes Aniara in full. Now, 3 years earlier, the first 29 cantos had been published separately as the Song of Doris and Mima in his collection Cicada.
Yes. So the story, the way the story goes, is that in 1952, after getting news that the Soviet Union had exploded their first thermonuclear device,
Mm.
he has some absolutely horrific dreams
hmm
uh, about like the Earth getting destroyed and humanity having to flee. And after that, he basically, I mean, you hear this kind of story endless times, but he basically goes into a kind of trance and just like automatically writes these first 29 songs.
I love it when that happens.
If
Yeah.
only, right?
And I assume they went through a lot of editing, but yeah, so in 1953 he publishes those or that part of the story.
Hmm.
And then like events in the 50s lead to him keeping on coming back to this concept. And eventually he expands it into the 109 songs we get in the final thing, which he publishes on the 13th of October 1956.
Yes. Yes, and this is his best known work. It really takes off. It's
Yeah,
compared
like this
to
is his big international breakthrough.
Yeah, people compare it to Paradise Lost and Jacob to C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy.
There's actually only one section of the space trilogy that this is even remotely similar to, but
Is it Paralandra?
no, it's actually the first one when they're on the trip to Mars.
Gotcha. Adapted into an opera, like we said. There was a TV movie the following year, the feature film Jacob that you saw. In December 2019, to skip ahead, the extrasolar planet HD 102956b was named Isabel after the ship's pilot.
Yeah.
It's about 399 light years from us. Its star was named Aniara. And it's a runaway success, but it casts kind of a shadow over the rest of his life. As early as 1963, he's complaining that he doesn't think he'll ever write anything nearly as good. Um,
Yeah.
and at
Yeah,
that
it's a tough act
time,
to follow, I think.
it is, yeah, absolutely. And at the time, like
Um,
he hasn't published anything in 3 years, and
yeah.
like
And he was kind of a I mean, in case the story we've been telling hasn't been giving you that impression, he was kind of a neurotic and self-critical person.
Sure.
yes, which leads to what eventually happens to him. Now, like of course,
Yeah.
in '74, he's put out a couple more poetry collections by this time, but nothing as big as Aniara. But in '74,
No.
he gets the Nobel Prize. This is a controversy
So a
because,
thing that should be worth mentioning
yes,
is that in 1949, Martinson becomes the first proletarian writer to be elected into the Swedish Academy.
yes,
Makes
And
sense.
the Swedish Academy, for those of you who don't know, is a group of 18 people. I think they had elected a couple of women at that point, but originally it was 18 men who are, I mean, they're like charged with. So this is an institution with royal patronage, which is charged with preserving and promoting the Swedish language.
Sure.
It was modeled on the Académie Française,
hmm
but it's probably its most important, like its most high-profile role. Like in Sweden, it's also very well known for publishing a series of dictionaries. But its most high-profile role internationally is awarding the Nobel Prize in Literature.
Makes
yes,
sense.
yes.
So the thing about Martinson getting the Nobel Prize is that he was on the committee that awarded it.
Right.
He and the other guy who get it
And
that year.
so was Eivind Johnson, who shared the prize with him that year. Yeah.
hmm So there's
So
like
they gave the prize to two of their own members.
yeah, so there's like that element of like provinciality that people like call them out for.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Uh,
it's
Max, what's the general thought process? I don't know. From your end, obviously this guy's a great writer. Do you think that this was just like a self-congratulatory act, or do you think the other members of the committee genuinely thought he should have it? What's your read on this situation? Obviously, we're just kind of
I
guessing.
think they might. I think it was merited in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
I also think the criticism is very understandable.
Sure.
Like in general, in general, the Nobel Prizes and especially the Literature Prize, and even more so at this time than today, tended to be a very Eurocentric institution.
Mm,
And in particular, I think Swedish and Nordic writers have been very overrepresented.
sure.
Which is, I mean, I won't go so far as to defend it, but I think it is understandable,
Yeah, you're
given
you're
the
awarding
nature
what you
of the
know.
prize. Yeah,
If you're reading a number of languages, the languages you don't read, it's going to be hard. Yeah, that
yeah,
makes
and
sense.
I also sometimes question to what extent we should expect the Nobel Prizes to be a worldwide phenomenon.
Mm, sure.
But yeah, this is like giving the prize to one of their own members or two of their own members is not a good look.
Yeah, that
For
that
At this
sure.
meme of like
point.
Obama giving himself a medal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Like even if it's warranted, you're like, yeah, feel that.
Yeah,
And
Yeah,
for
that
sure.
that has a negative effect, though. The response to
yes,
this really hurts him, doesn't it?
yeah. No, he does
Quite
not live
deeply.
this down for the entire rest of his life, and I think
Yeah,
that's in part due to his own guilt over it.
sure.
Yes. Yeah, he it's about 4 years after he wins the prize and he deals with that. He's dealing with a relapse of chronic illness also at this time. And in 78 he attempts to commit seppuku with a pair of scissors.
Wait,
Uh
literally seppuku?
like literally like
Yeah, he
ritual
cuts open his
suicide.
stomach.
I thought you were
Yeah.
doing a joke at first. Holy shit.
No,
No, no, no, no,
no.
no, no. Yeah, it doesn't go well, obviously, and he dies a few days later, February
Jesus
11th that year.
Christ.
Yeah,
Yeah. He dies of the after effects of this, not of actually cutting his stomach open.
right. Just
And like as far as ways to die go, I
agonizing.
think this is one of the worst
Yeah,
ones.
low on my list. Holy shit.
Yeah.
But yeah, but his legacy does outlive him. Like the
Oh
Swedish
yeah, absolutely.
Academy awards a writing scholarship in his name. His 100th birthday was celebrated in '04. The Cicada Prize is awarded
Yeah.
annually since that year. He's reputed to be the greatest Swedish author since Strindberg. No idea what Ibsen might think of that.
I mean, Ibsen was yeah. Yeah, no, I don't really rate Strindberg either.
Hmm.
In large part because I was in high school when they celebrated his. I forget if it was like his 150th birthday or something like that.
Hmm.
But there was like a year of Strindberg, so he was like almost all we had to read.
Oh wow.
And there is not that much good Strindberg. There's
Like I love the author, but I went to college in Milledgeville, Georgia, so like I had to take a break from Flannery O'Connor for a while. Like it's just
yeah,
like yeah, the proximity sometimes can burn you out.
yeah, absolutely.
No disrespect to Flannery O'Connor, just if you read one thing endlessly.
Hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he's a real interesting guy, is Martinson. And like
Yeah,
the Nobel Prize Institute they have a pretty good article on him, and they ended off, I'm not going to read it here, but it's called The Great Trouble that he wrote in 1971, and I think it sums up pretty well his whole vibe. You know, he acknowledges the task that we as humans have to bend progress toward universal betterment, but he's not sure that he himself, or indeed any authority yet living, is really suited to do this.
yeah, that sounds right.
Hmm.
Mm. And so the Aniara itself, we talked about it. Obviously, Lenore and I did not read the Swedish version. We read, or at least I
Yeah,
read the translation by Stephen Klass and Leif Schonberg, I believe is the last name. Um,
yeah, yeah. So this is the newer of the two translations.
Lenore,
Mm.
what did you
Uh,
read? Which one did you read?
Yeah, it was the Klaus and Sailberg, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
cool.
So the first translation was co-written by the Scottish poet Hugh MacDiarmid,
Okay.
who is also an absolutely insane character.
Mm-hmm.
Like he was at various times in his life both a fascist, a Stalinist, and a Scottish nationalist.
My God.
And he was one of the people. Apparently, he was one of the people that George Orwell put on his list that he wrote for MI5 of untrustworthy intellectuals.
Oh
That
wow.
sounds like he sounds like a person on the internet before his time. Just
Yeah, yeah,
every
yeah.
belief. The
But
Baathist
apparently,
coal miner or whatever.
yeah, yeah. Apparently, his translation was very highly regarded as a work of poetry in its own right.
Mm.
But it didn't sort of go like it diverged quite a bit from the original the original form and the original content. And so they made a second translation in 1999, which is the one that both of you have read and the one that's available on the internet. And
Yes.
that one, I mean, I've read bits of it, and it is quite close in terms of style, but does so by like sometimes sacrificing the sort of elegance of the language.
Sure. What I was gonna say is like obviously
And
this.
like this is always this is always a trade-off you have to make when translating poetry.
Right.
Especially like
Obviously,
in a poem like this that uses a lot of like neologisms, right? A lot of really
yes,
unconventional word constructions, like the word
yeah,
tundrasphere
yeah.
alone, right? Like how do you
We
translate
are
that?
about to get Goldonder pilled
Yeah.
Yes.
so
I
hard.
it's interesting. It's like this obviously isn't poetry, but prose, three body problem. We had a listener in Hong Kong reach out
Yeah,
and was like, yeah, the English translation of three body problem just doesn't really capture the science, the what and I literally I'm like, okay, maybe. I don't know.
yeah. I
But
mean, obviously, like Chinese and English are
that's
a
a jump.
lot more different as languages
I have to imagine he's right because I have no
than
argument against
Swedish and
that.
English.
But yeah, this is the
But
same
I have
problem
no
we ran
difficulty
into.
believing that.
Yeah, this is the same problem we ran into, of course, with Peer Gynt, and we'll run into again.
Hmm.
But
Yeah,
ultimately, we have to, work with what we've got. But I think what
yeah,
I've read is, yeah, people are like, this is the gist of it. They try and get the poetry where they can, but especially poetry, it's like word choice is so
yeah,
particular.
yeah. And
Things like meter, that's tough.
I think the Class Squareback translation does also go out of its way to preserve the neologisms
Hmm.
and
Yes.
like the specific use of language, which is very useful because that is a huge part of what this poem is.
And what this poem is, just to give you, the plot, the
Yeah.
story. It is a spaceship called the Aniara that is taking off
Yes.
from Earth.
It's excuse me, it's a Goldonder.
A Goldunga, yes, exactly. Taking off from Earth because Earth is becoming increasingly unlivable
Yeah,
due
it's
to
field
nukes.
releasing from Earth.
Yes. And yeah.
I'm
And
going to keep doing this.
fair enough. And they're trying to
Yeah,
get
no.
to a habitable zone like here on Mars, which is not going to be a great time, but
Yes.
it's livable. And their
Yeah.
ship gets
Although it's
serves to
apparently it's
clear
like
an
it's
asteroid.
Mars is in the process of terraforming because one of
Yes.
the things that is in the first canto but not in the verse we read is that apparently everyone who boards this ship has to bring a certain amount of arable soil with them.
Mhm.
Yes, if that's your ticket. But what happens is, unfortunately, quote, a swerve to clear the Hondo asteroid herewith proclaimed discovered took us off our course. We came too wide of Mars, slipped from its orbit, and to avoid the field of Jupiter, we settled on the curve of Ice 12 within the Magdalena Field's external ring. But meeting with great swarms of Leonids, we headed further off to Eco 9 in the field of Sari 16, we gave up attempts to turn around. That means that they are off course, they are hurtling into space. And look,
Yeah.
their ship is,
I'm so
for the time being, self-sufficient. They've got food, they've got air, they've got water. We don't need to go
yeah.
into the details of how,
Yeah, no,
but
he does not
they
explain
will
how this
just
works, but it doesn't matter.
but they will effectively just go on the few thousand of them into space indeterminately until they all die.
Yes.
And there is no going back. You just
Yeah.
abandon hope. The movie tries to do like oh, we'll try turn around at the whatever. There's none of that in the poem.
No.
They've
This is
all given up.
fatalist.
They're just like, fuck it.
Yeah.
This is it.
So, a thing that does bear mentioning is that Hondo, the name of the asteroid they hit, is an older form of the name Honshu, which is the main island of Japan.
Yes.
Hmm.
And
Hiroshima,
so
Nagasaki, etc.
Nagasaki is on Kyushu, but
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, it reference directly to the nukes. And then and if there's any question later on, we have just incredibly specific descriptions of
We have
nuclear
Canto
fire.
26 for that.
Yes,
Which I think
harrowing.
you should read in full.
We will. Harrowing.
Because it is like the linchpin of this entire thing.
No doubt. But that's and our speaker, does our speaker ever get named?
He actually.
Well, he doesn't, or they. We don't. I don't think they're even gendered.
I don't believe so.
I think they've generally been treated as male by literary criticism.
Sure.
Partly because Martinson is a man.
Yeah.
Partly because this character is extremely horny for women, which, as we know, only men are.
Classically. I won't endlessly make references to the movie, but the movie does make it a lesbian relationship. But I don't think that's the intention here.
But no, so our protagonist is the Mima Robe.
Yes.
Who is the servant of the Mima. And we will get into what the Mima is.
Well, maybe let's do that now. Max, what is the Mima?
Yeah. So, I think
what isn't a Mima?
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, exactly. The Mima is a state of mind. And that's actually only like 25% a joke.
Yeah.
So the Mima is this device that they have on the ship that apparently, like, in some way, like, projects images and like creates art. It's never really described in concrete terms, but it is a very important sort of cultural artifact of this society. Because one thing that should be mentioned is that the sort of cultures and values depicted in this book, in this poem, are not like the real ones that exist on Earth now.
Sure.
Like every place that is mentioned is fictional, and all of the like he makes constant reference to different cultures that do not exist. So like they're not only going somewhere science fiction-y, they're also like escaping an Earth that is only sort of, I was gonna say only superficially similar to ours, but it's actually kind of the other way around. The superficials are completely different, but the vibes are similar.
Just to read a little bit about the Mima because it's so central.
Yeah.
Quote, there are in the Mima certain features it had come up with in which functioned there in circuitry of such a kind as human thought had never traveled through. For example, take the third web's action and focus works, and the ninth rotator's kinematic readout in the flicker phase before the screener cell takes over everything, allots, combines. The inventor himself was completely dumbstruck the day he found out that one half of the Mima he'd invented lay beyond analysis, that the Mima had invented half herself. Well, then, as everybody knows, he changed. His title had the modesty to realize that once she took full form, she was the superior and he himself a secondary power, a mimator. The mimator died, the Mima stays alive. The mimator died, the Mima found her style. Yeah, so somewhat. It's that.
I mean, this
it's
is
the
like
thing they center around.
This is what the OpenAI guys think ChatGPT is.
Yes, it is. It is, and it is also like their connection to where they come from. That becomes incredibly essential as they get far away. It's how they can see Earth. It's how they can see other humans. It's how they can find out what's going on at all, which turns out to end darkly.
Yeah, if we're going to like if we're going to move over to the Doylist perspective on this, what the meme is it's a metaphor for the concept of art.
Mhm.
Okay.
And it's what's going to happen to it as the story goes on is basically a way for Martinson to write about what he thinks is like what the conditions are of making art in the nuclear age.
Yeah, and in well, and the diegetic, like in universe, like perspective on this is like it's this it's the system that like keeps people pacified, that keeps people sane with visions of the world that they have left behind, but it's incomplete, right? Like in
Yeah,
few chapters prior, right? The Mima tuned us into signs of life spread far and wide, but where the Mima gives no word of. We pull in traces, pictures, landscapes, scraps of language being spoken someplace, only where. So they're aware of where they are in the universe. It's detecting to my reading um signs of life, but like they're powerless to divine the origin. They're powerless to sort of interact with it and sift through it in that way. It's a little bit like
yeah,
our like three body aliens, right? They can determine the origin of something, but not its distance.
I have
yeah,
this feeling too that it's like this incredibly powerful thing that they only barely understand. It's almost this count, and it of course is destroyed by this tragedy that we will get to, but it's almost the
yes,
positive counter half to the bomb, right? It's like I've heard
yeah.
the bomb, the A bomb, the H bomb described as like a
The
25th.
phototurb.
Yeah, described as like a 25th century technology we accidentally came across in the 20th century. The Mima almost feels like their equivalent of like it's something that's beyond them. They don't quite get it.
Yeah,
They don't quite it's more than that.
yeah,
They
absolutely.
on the artistic and informational side, right? So it's like, oh, there's life around. Oh, there's this, there's that. You almost get the idea that if the Mima really like had a mind to, if it had a mind at all, it could probably turn the fucking ship around. It could be a god. It has no care to do that, and they have no
Mhm.
capacity to harness.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, I mean, I think there are probably signs that the Mima does have a mind of its own.
Yeah,
It's
yes, but
just
it
not in
doesn't
quite
care
that
to.
way.
Yeah, it doesn't care to interact with them in the way that they maybe even would want it to. Like, I think
Mhm.
Yeah,
they would be happy to worship this thing as a god if it had any intention of allowing itself to be used like that.
yeah,
Well, and you get the dynamic then where like the Mima robe, by virtue of being like one of the few people who knows how it works, even, I mean, it's become sort of self-sustaining and self like iterating, but like by virtue of being one of the few people who knows, um, who can begin to understand how it works, he's like the soothsayer for it essentially.
yeah,
So
basically.
so he
Like,
occupies that like privileged position in society.
yeah.
It's to my mind because there
Like
is.
whatever the Mima is, it's
Mm,
clear that you do need a very, very specialized person to run it.
yes.
And this is this profession is treated um, with like such a level of reverence by this society that you essentially have to take an oath to like become part of the Mima.
Hmm.
Yeah, it is a priesthood, essentially.
Which is why, as we mentioned, the Mima robe no longer has a name.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, it's a real surrender to this dynamic because again, it's become sort of self-iterating and self-sustaining the Mima has. So like you're receiving its messages and you're receiving what it shows you based on the memories of the passengers, it seems. Um, it's interesting in the
Yeah,
context of like the other like occupations you see on the ship, right? Because like I'm looking at in the beginning of five here, right? The pilots are more nonchalant than we, and fatalists of that most recent stamp which only vacant spaces could have formed through seeming changeless stars' hypnotic force on human souls agog for mysteries. Um, and death fits altogether naturally into their scheme, a constant crystal clear, but still one sees that after 5 years now, they too look down the pinnacle of fear. So like he's got a real he's got a real unique construction to to his verses, does Martinson.
Yeah.
But like it's I'm looking at this and I'm like okay, so the pilots are like at least we're on an adventure is what I'm seeing, right? They're looking at it in
Yeah,
that
yeah, basically. We
context.
don't get to do this normally.
Right, right, exactly. And I can't help but think, like, when I read about them, when I read about the other, like, fatalists who, like, accept the possibility of death, like, I wonder if he's thinking of, like, of workers and other leftists here, like, or people just trying, like, he's either describing people who are just trying to live their lives and do their jobs, alongside people who, like, historical materialism moves to organize, right? Hope for the best
Yeah.
and organize for the
Well,
worst.
Isagel is one of these navigators as well, yeah?
Yes.
And
Yes.
Isagel is like to me,
Uh,
I'm which the name killed me. Like we gotta do away with these millennials naming their kids things like Kaylee with three H's and Isagel, you know.
yeah.
But it there is like something to it. It's like you are and he was like
Naming my child Chiffone.
exactly. Casually. He is our protagonist. I'm gonna refer to him as he because it's how I read it. And
Yeah.
he is riding on this ship with and I'm imagining Martinson, these navigators he's known, right? Who have seen these horrific conditions, working in
Yeah, yeah,
fucking
yeah.
coal and like just people that could stick at that and not run away like he did. Just
Mhm.
you have to be like steely-eyed and like you have to be able to like
Yeah, it
make it
turns you into a
happen.
certain kind of person, right?
Right. And you have to just sort of hide that, even if you do have that fear, like, be a
Yeah.
man and chug some beer about it. Like that's the kind of vibe you get. But I mean, it is genuinely scary. I love at in 10 says the sterile void of space is terrifying. Glass-like is the stare encircling us, and the systems of stars hang frozen and still in the round crystal windows of our ships. And then going forward, it says everything looks as if solidified and frozen to the mount of everlasting, like grains of diamond in a crystal sheath encompassing the very boundlessness and a massive radiant hall of utter distance. And I love that
Yeah.
image of like it is so big that you are essentially just stuck in the light years. Like it
Yeah.
might as well be infinite, that size. It's like that moment. It really encapsulates that moment, like when you're a kid and you first realize how big space is, like the first time you
Yeah.
see a graph of like Earth next to the sun next to and you just like want to throw up. At least
You
that's the
may think
experience
it's a
I
long
had.
way down the road to the chemist, but that's peanuts to space.
Literally, God, we got to do Hitchhikers at some point. It's 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 that and this in poetry form, I think, is one of the best ways I've ever seen that encapsulated.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But the navigators, they're just clenching their teeth about it, holding it
Yeah.
down. And I'm curious, Max, how you feel that the language of it, the actual just you know pretty parts of it, the parts that just sound good to read, how that crosses over into the original language. Because even here in the translation, I'm pretty
Yeah.
blown away by some of this imagery.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, it's kind of hard to really definitively say because I think the English language has like more different sort of literary registers,
Hmm.
if that makes
Well,
sense.
actually, I'm kind of curious. Speak to that.
So basically, the English language is this insane sort of Frankenstein
No doubt.
of like, I mean, it is a Germanic language in most ways that count, but also you have all of this French and all of this Latin and all of these different influences from different directions and places. Whereas I think Swedish has, to a much greater extent, sort of both of its feet planted in the Germanic structure and vocabulary.
Sure.
Um, so I think I think the translation, the 90s translation, does pretty well at sticking to that. But I also think that's always going to read slightly differently in English.
Gotcha.
Like
And
it's
what
going to read as something you're deliberately doing. In a
Mm.
way it does.
interesting.
In a way it doesn't when you write in Swedish because that's just the way the language works.
Feel like it
Like
doesn't sound quite as natural.
Yeah.
there's compound
Like
phrases
this
in.
bit, like the specific bit you were talking about
Mhm.
before the break, Jacob, I think does work very well in English as well.
Mm,
But there are definitely bits where the English translation feels slightly clunky.
There's compound phrases and like constructions in here, like in 11 it called like Jupiter a devil star with an evil death quilt.
Yeah, yeah,
It's very Beowulf to me, like seas as whale
yeah, and
roads, like.
that's definitely not by accident,
Mhm.
because
epic
Swedish
poem.
is, of course, a compounding language,
Yes.
in much the same way as like German. And I think that is actually a place where the Tolkien comparison becomes relevant again.
Yeah.
Because Tolkien was, I mean, among English language writers, especially of his time, I think Tolkien was a very Germanicizing writer.
Yeah. Which
Uh,
I think he would be
and
flattered to hear that.
yeah, and
See,
ironically,
yeah.
of course, and this is a digression that I recognize is dangerous because we could probably talk about this for like an hour. But ironically, the reason why Tolkien hated the first Swedish translation of Lord of the Rings so much is that it sidestepped that
Mm.
and was much more verbose than the original English version.
Tolkien is interesting because, and again, if for readers who are tired of it, it's talking about Tolkien. We did 4 episodes on him, but
Yeah,
whatever. I'll
I'm
give it a
sorry. This is my fault
no.
this
It's
time.
fine. I'm gonna say something that's more relevant to Aniara on this.
Yeah,
Um, he does. It's interesting because his poetry in his books is one thing. It's mostly characters saying stuff, but he also has the epic poetry that mostly gets published after his death. Lay of
yeah,
Leithian and some of that sort of thing. Fall of Gondolin. Stuff that Christopher Tolkien like edited and released, and
yeah.
that does sound like more similar to some of this stuff. The
Yeah,
rhythm and also like the simplicity of a lot of the sort of meter and stuff like that. It does
yeah,
feel like it's trying, not trying to be, but it's wants to be something sort of older, as this
yeah.
does as well. So yeah, there's definitely like a
Which is
mirroring there.
ironic because as I was like before you got to that bit, I was gonna say that I think if you referred to Tolkien as a modernist in any kind of circumstance, he probably would have had you killed.
Oh, no doubt, no doubt. Like, yeah, he was, not well by not a well man after his time in World War I, but he'd have made it
Yeah,
happen. He'd
Mm.
have
yeah,
found
exactly.
that rugby player's strength pre-mustard gas and brought you down.
Yeah,
Uh, but yeah, so they go through space. Everyone's feeling fucking bad. You
yeah. So
have the
you may have
years
noticed
passing.
that in the bit we read from Canto 5, by that point it's already been 5 years.
Yeah, because the
Yes.
first few years people are handling it. They're like, you know what? They're probably, imagine what you will. But I imagine for them, they're on this they're on the spaceship and to like humanize it. They're like, well, this is kind of like a little planet. It is what it is, Earth. And
Yeah,
I think there's an
and we
intentionality
have the
too.
meme, of course.
Yes.
Yes.
And I think there's an intentionality too of it's kind of like, well, Earth is also just a thing that's just going around and around that we can live on.
Yeah,
So, whatever. And it really starts to set in. And they become, I think, a little more as people, a little more perverse. It notes that like even the Mima, they're like trying to watch more violent images and shit like that on
yeah,
it. Snuff films, presumably, getting into some Oryx and
yeah.
Crake shit.
And
Oryx and Crake,
they're
one of
about
the
to
most,
get what they want.
yes, Oryx and Crake, which is probably like the most referenced book on here that we haven't talked about. Um, but like the they're yeah, watching their snuff films, they're becoming more violent. They're getting increasingly like a little internally authoritarian with their captain. Uh,
Yes.
and it's building it's and one thing I find interesting is there is just no, which is I love, is just no attempt to think, well, maybe we'll get lucky enough to whatever. Like it's just like, yeah, no,
Yeah.
we're fucked.
No, this is a fatalist work from beginning to end, which I
Yes.
think is really interesting.
And there would, and I think a lesser author would have, and if this was a book, you would have a novel, you would almost have to do this. Have like a false hope of like, oh, we're gonna like do some gravitational thing or whatever. The movie does this just to have drama, but in a poem to have that, I think would disrupt the flow of this increasingly. It gets increasingly chaotic and increasingly like dark and bleak as it goes, and I'd say even increasingly weird. And I think that being an uninterrupted, basically slope into essentially madness makes this
Yeah.
work so well.
Yeah.
And the madness really, it really appears in the world in the form of like the death of the Mima, which I think is
Yes.
really the natural next thing to talk about
Yeah.
here. We got to read
Yeah.
that bit.
So should we read Canto 26?
Yeah, Lenore, do you want to do that?
Yeah, 26. Let me get do.
This is one of those things that just like every time for the past few months there have been more news out of Gaza, I've just been thinking about this language.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's hard not to feel. Yeah.
Yeah, the bit. This might be a little long, but I'm gonna read. The stone-dumb deaf man started to describe the worst sound he had heard. It was past hearing, though just when his eardrums were exploding came a sound like the sough of sorrowing sedge, the last when the phototurb exploded Dorisberg. It was past hearing, so the deaf man ended. My ear could not keep up with it, when my soul burst and scattered, and body burst and shattered, and 10 square miles of city ground were wrung inside outside, as the phototurb was bursting the mighty city once called Dorisberg. So he spoke, the deaf man, who was dead. But as so it's been said, stones shall cry out, so the dead man did his speaking in a stone. From the stone he cried out, Can you hear me? From the stone he cried out, Don't you hear me? My native city once was Dorisberg. Then the blind man started his report upon the light horrifically intense that blinded him. He was unable to describe it. He mentioned only one detail. He saw by neck. His entire skull became an eye, blinded by a brightness beyond flashpoint, lifted and sped off in blind reliance on the sleep of death, but no sleep came. In this respect, he is much like the deaf man. And as so it's been said, stones shall cry out, so he cries out from stones, as does the deaf man. So they cry out from stones one with the other, so they cry out from stones as did Cassandra. I rush into the Mima as though I could prevent the ghastly deed by my distress, but she shows all, candid and upright, unto the last projecting fire and death. And turning to the others, I cry out my pain of pains beholding Doris's death. There is protection from near everything, from fire and damages by storm and frost. Oh, add whichever blows may come to mind. But there is no protection from mankind. When there is need, none sees with clarity. No, only when the task is to beat down. When there is need, none sees with clarity. No, only when the task is to beat down and desolate the heart's own treasury of dreams to live upon in cold and evil years. Then the meme is blinded by a bluish bolt, and I am dumbstruck at events that pour on wretched earth. Out here the lightnings bore down through my heart as through an open sore. And I, the Mima's faithful priest in blue, receive in blood run cold the evil news that Doris died in far-off Dorisberg.
Yeah, fucking.
There's some imagery there.
Yeah, saw by neck is
Yeah.
the one that really stands out to me, right? Like
Yeah.
it's beyond anything that your eyes can process, you know, the light. Like your whole head just lights up.
Yeah, describing
Yeah.
the city as being wrung, like a rag or something, is deeply disturbing. And it's like an idea I've like kicked around that eventually it's gonna be something, is this idea of like obviously human machinery and development through history bringing great prosperity and we're not dying of tuberculosis in the same numbers and things like that.
Yeah.
But also having this potentiality of this destruction is almost this like biblical style like beast at the end of history, like the ability
Yeah.
to self
And I
destroy.
don't think it's an accident that he starts talking about stones crying out.
Yeah, it's literally just the Bible reference right there.
Yeah.
And later when he's talking about like he uses it a number of times, but it is just genuinely like their home, the port they have launched from, Dorisburg, has been obliterated. The Mima allows them to witness this, and then the Mima itself is destroyed. The Mima no longer
Yeah,
can
the meme
transmit.
commits suicide,
Yeah.
basically.
So showing its, one bit of feeling. And it's interesting that they have been sort of indulging in saying dark fantasies. They have been, giving into whatever. And it's like almost like the earth itself is now nothing. It's almost like, yeah, if they could go back, there's nothing to go back to. Is it just Dorisburg? Is it the whole earth? We don't know, but the shit is fried. Um,
Yeah,
and it is like obviously you have Martinson here just dealing with his, like he said, his dreams and terror around the bomb and
yeah,
around the of what feels like an inevitability of that time of nuclear conflict, and it's
yeah,
in the
and
destruction of art and beauty in that possibility.
yeah, exactly. Like, I think the fact that, like, the witnessing a nuclear explosion causes the Mima, the sort of avatar of the concept of art, to kill itself.
Yeah.
Like, that's. I mean, I've said a lot that things are not accidental, but I think that may be the least accidental thing in this whole
Yeah.
work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's this thing that like the closest thing to a god that we've been able to create, and like in taking in and playing back to us the totality of our existence, like leading up to the nuclear destruction of Earth. Like the first sentient thing we as humans build decides to kill itself ultimately.
Yeah, God
Um,
is dead and we have killed him.
yes,
Mhm.
yes,
We
and like
built him and then killed him. Yes.
and
Yeah,
it's also interesting to me like we've talked about Dorisburg a few times, like the
yeah,
the name of the city stem derives from way back in the first canto, like the receptionist that like files the narrator onto the ship in the first place. Like it's weird to me
yeah.
that like the name of the
And
city is
he makes
yeah.
sure that to get a thing in that this receptionist who appears in like 5 words of this poem, that they mention like shining by the light of her blondness.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Because again, this is like for all the sort of darkness of this poem, it is also deeply horny.
Yeah, of course. Well, the crazy thing is when he approached the receptionist,
She
yeah,
leans over and
yeah,
her like her
she
shirt
leaned
falls
over
open.
to call him up, and yeah, obviously he had to bounce his eyes, as Fred Stoker had instructed him to do.
The Fred Stoker becomes the meme robe, is what you're saying?
Yeah, no, Fred Stoker is the Mimarobe, and the reason it killed itself is all the shit that he was like watching on there.
It's all
That's
Yeah,
connected.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
alternates. If an American had written this,
yeah.
God
Yeah,
damn. Yeah, no, it's also interesting. I think a lesser work, and not even a bad work, but a lesser work. This would have been like the end, right?
I
This would
mean,
have
this
happened at
is
the
like the
end.
original. The Song of Doris and Mima is the first
Yeah,
29 cantos,
sure,
but like
but then
even
it
then, there's
keeps
still
going.
3 more. Yeah,
Yeah, it keeps going. Like they now have to sit with the emptiness, and
yeah,
they
and I
get
think
real weird.
especially in the full work, like the
Mhm.
fact that this happens a quarter of the way in
Yeah,
is
it's like
insane.
it's this early climax, and now we're sitting in the wreckage of the future. And it's like it's also him sitting there like, okay, we already invented the bomb. We've already seen it. We've already used it on civilians. We've already seen these world
Yeah,
wars. From his perspective, there's no real like he's looking around. He doesn't see any country that he feels like is reflecting his values. He feels isolated. Martinson does. So
yeah,
he's just like, we are now sitting in the wreckage and we are on the ship and we are just kind of waiting to die, which is
yeah,
is bleak. But I also think he doesn't necessarily mean it in the same reactionary type way as like, Hunter
yeah,
S. Thompson or something. I think it's just a
yeah. No, I
deeply
think.
lonely cry of the soul.
Yeah,
Mm.
I think like Martinson is definitely less clearly left wing than a lot of the other proletarians.
Hmm.
But I don't think he's right wing either.
At least he doesn't mean to be. He maybe comes
Yeah,
down
yeah,
on right
yeah.
wing
No,
positions.
obviously, like, yeah,
Yeah. He's like he's
Like I don't think
self-consciously
he subscribes to a right-wing ideology.
right. And I don't
Whether
think
or not he
he's
makes right-wing art is obviously a separate question.
And I don't think he's necessarily telling you, the Mima is dead, embrace, consumption and individuality. He's just sitting here with
No,
his
yeah,
own loneliness in the real
yeah,
world and is like, this is how I feel, and this is how society,
Well,
the word's been
yeah.
almost ruined for
We
me.
certainly live in one.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
we live in an Aniara. We really do.
well, and indeed, like it's interesting to me
We
that
live
like
in a Goldonder.
Yeah. I hate when that
and,
happens.
and for somebody who like rejected the idea of okay, like the author has to be the engine of society, right? That, if you're going to
Yeah,
if you're going to be if you're going to be a writer, if you're going to pursue this art, you have a responsibility to shape ideology, to shape movements, to give people sort of something to aspire to in your work. For somebody who rejected that, it's interesting to me that like that's what the meme robe is ultimately here consigned to, right? Like here
yeah, yeah,
in 35, right? I in service as the meme robe, responsible for all the burst illusions, must make room in Mima's sanctuary and blend all spectacles and all their sounds when Libidine dances with voluptuary to ring in their god by orgiastic rounds. So like religion comes back in this like very like cultish form, and he's sort of has
yeah.
to be the master of ceremonies for it.
Is the Mimarome the Lorax of this world? He's the Mimarobe. He speaks for the Mima. No, I will say, as somebody who he rejected the engine of society. They are really they would do well if they had an engine on the Aniara, an engine of society on the Aniara,
Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah, absolutely.
they could use that. But they immediately like fall into super totalitarianism now. Like our protagonist gets thrown in
Yes.
the gulag.
A couple of times, yeah.
Yeah. It's just kind of like literally they're just like, yeah, you're going under the ship.
A couple of times, and like they're so hyper specialized, him and the other like Mima techs, that like they have to communicate by like drawing like as best they can, but like it doesn't end up mattering because like the High Council can't even decide what to do with them.
The council will
Yeah.
not decide your fate.
Yeah,
And
and
it gets increasingly weird from here. It
yeah,
really does.
now
Yes.
now you have fertility cults because I guess because the only certainty is like sensation.
Yeah. So they start to fuck a lot.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
this includes the Mima robe.
Yeah, the rigors of space and pell us into rites and altar services we'd scarce performed since pre-gondolic times and now half forgot. And the
Yeah.
women, they have made themselves a lovely sight. The pains that many had to take were slight. It's-
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
uh, yeah, they're and I like that they like put up 1,000 mirrors while they're fucking to like have reflections of themselves and stuff. And
Yeah,
also
this
I
is
think
definitely a fetish.
yeah, and I also think it's like it makes for a gorgeous scene in the movie. Really, really, really cool, weird scene. But it also the 1,000 mirrors, right, while they're like having their orgy or whatever, is showing it's almost like a proto Mima, right? Like they're trying to rebuild, not proto, it's a post Mima. They're trying to
Yeah.
recreate this thing with these images in the crystal, and it's just showing them and the things they can make because they, not personally, but as a society, have destroyed anything else outside them and can't
Yeah.
reach it. So now they just have to look at themselves. And they are deteriorating. Literally, the leader of this fertility cult, her body is getting older. She is getting like stretch marks and stuff. And yeah, I think
Yeah.
Martinson is
Which
horny
would
while he's writing
happen
about that.
if
Yeah.
you fuck every day for 20 years.
Of course, or you just live for 20 years,
I'm sure
And
Fidel Castro looked quite weird by the end of his life.
yeah, no doubt, no doubt. I think the idea is like they're doing the fertility call, and that's getting them on for a while. It's getting them off for a while, eh? But they are deteriorating, and so is their leader, and she's like trying to like make her body look better. And like I said, yeah, like Martinson is writing this with one hand a little bit, but
Yeah.
at the same time, he is making a real point of like, yeah, this is also fleeting. Like you are just using your now shrinking stack of resources because you have cut everything outside yourself off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's solipsistic, but not in the sense of like Martinson is the solipsist. It's like, holy shit, solipsism is the scariest. Or societal solipsism is so fucking terrifying, and it's also our only option now.
Yeah.
There's a mathematical breakthrough that Isabel makes in 39 that I'm not sure what to make of in that context, right? Because like the pursuits now are just like of the self, of sensation, of like the of your basest physical desires. But in
Finally,
39,
the Aleph.
Yes.
the Aleph.
She joins Aum Shinrikyo.
Hmm.
And breakthrough which had never been foreseen was made by Isabel, our female pilot. One morning, she sat silent in the Gopta room where she was occupied with gender curves. I'm always occupied with gender curves. Thereupon she called me to the
Oh, it's
gender.
Martinson.
Thereupon she called me
Yeah.
to the gender board, where lightning swift she'd stabilized her breakthrough provisionally in its final
Yeah.
form.
Actually, you still need approval from the gender board to do certain
Yes.
uh, to do
Uh, un
certain things in this country.
I do think that's yeah. The right wing really does think there are gender boards.
Yeah.
They are
So
secretly running our society.
for the benefit of the listeners, Martinson spells gender with a J, but
Mm.
nevertheless.
Yes, it is. It's like a. Oh, actually, I was going to ask, is that a Swedish term or is this just some like science nonsense?
No. This is just a new, like a
This is the
word
glove
he's come
shitto.
up with. Yeah.
He's got some glove shittos in this, folks. No doubt.
Yeah, and I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not
I,
So
sure
I
what to.
the thing they mention about the law of Aleph numbers that we made reference to is not in the original.
oh,
It
interesting.
just says the law of like big numbers.
Okay.
Okay.
I
I
think
don't know. I don't know if this is like the accepted English name for the same thing. I don't know enough about mathematics for that, or if this is just something the translators felt like adding in.
yeah, and Aleph is like it's just like it's just a symbol, yeah. I think it often gets used to mean infinity,
Uh,
but
Hmm.
yeah,
um
it's the first letter in the Hebrew alphabet.
mhm. I will say I think it this is mostly pointing to just sort of this idea of like you figured something out, but it's making art or making science at the end of the world. Like if we're already cooked, what is this serving? Or for her, it's like this is super cool, but like this isn't going past the confines of this ship. This isn't going to
Right.
serve a
Yeah,
greater project. And I think it's realizing like or at least to me, I'm
like
reading like without a broader society, without sharing something, this thing is doesn't serve anybody.
yeah, like if a tree falls in the woods, kind of thing.
Sure, or like you've done something great, but something is only great because you can share it with other people.
Yeah, I think this song is also kind of an a characterization moment for Isabel,
Mm,
and like the way that she sees the world, being the closest thing to like a proper female character this poem has.
Hmm.
Because she like represents sort of one end of like the spectrum of both human existence and also of womanhood.
yeah, I think,
Um,
and it's also at this point that we get some moments with other characters, right? We get like the
yeah,
space hand's tale, we get the
I mean this
blind
is
woman.
so yeah, like I said, the original Song of Doris and Mima was the first 29 cantos.
Hmm.
So like the bit that follows that is just Martinson kind of like fleshing out things that
Good
there
Lord.
wasn't room for or he didn't want to spend room on in the original.
Or the stuff for
Hmm.
Aniara Wiki. Like you find out that like, hey,
Yeah, exactly.
if they had actually made it to the planet, it would have fucking sucked. Like it was a
Hmm.
bad time on Mars. It's a bad time on Venus. There's like work colonies and shit.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and then there are, but it does have these brief moments of reflection on humanity that show humanity, and it's actually quite cool. Like you have the story of Nabi, which this guy, um, This guy, older man on the ship, is like, oh, I had this woman named Nabi. She was awesome. She had a bunch of burns, but she was always taking care of people who were like in these accidents on Mars. I really like when they have this horrible act. He's recounting this horrible incident that occurred, and it says, you know, a sun roar came, the lightnings ramified. I still hear the screams and screeches, sombra, sombra, from souls already blinded and afraid and rushing out to God in search of coolness. They did not know God too was in the fire of matter which combusted and befouled with flame primordial, chastise Zionbra. Zion Umbra.
Penumbra, yeah.
Yeah. And then it goes on talking about torrents and earthquakes. And it's interesting. It twists here, right? The classic biblical story is Elijah waited for God, and God was not in the fire, God was not in the cyclone, God was not in the earthquake, God was a still small voice, right? And in
Yeah.
this, it says, and I think it's because the modern era, we have created the bomb, we have created this new god of fire. God is in the fire. God is in the earthquake. Like actually, like God is judgment
Mhm.
now. That and whatever is left of the old God, the still small voice, is in this like this withered older woman who's just taking care of one person at a time. But ultimately, like in this world that has failed, that was futile because like she's not on the ship. Presumably she's, died of radiation poisoning or something.
Yeah.
But I thought that was like he just
Like
has
either
so
way,
many
we will
cool
never know.
right, and he has just so many cool moments like that where everything feels so big and grand, but he can make it also small, like with this one woman going from person to person with radiation poisoning, like doing what she can in the final moments.
Yeah.
Um, and if there is any like hope in this narrative, it is in those little things.
Yeah.
But also it is saying that God has changed the rules and God now just wants to kill everyone. So, not a lot of hope.
Yes.
Well, and indeed, God is in the thing that humanity has created and destroyed itself with, right? God
Yeah.
is the, God is, the Bible, like other holy texts, are written by man with man's understanding of the world. And so, as we seek to understand God, so too do we, and, uplift ourselves with that, so too do we, you know, create this deific force that can destroy us, right?
I'll note Nabi is also just called the Samarita. It's like, okay, so she's the Samaritan. Like it's
Yeah. So that.
he's not interested in tricking you about what he means here.
No, no, no.
He's like, you're gonna get my references, motherfucker.
Mhm. Is the space hand now? He's on the ship. He's on Aniara with the rest of them, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Like this is just like a previous life.
Mm.
the next thing I wrote down about, and y'all feel free to talk about something else, but what is y'all's thought process on the arch comic Sandon? Because this is another one of those just like little like episodes.
This is
Once
funny to
once
me.
we've now all fully lost our minds and have nothing to do but like sit with the few thousand people on this ship, this is one of the little characters who shows up. What are our thoughts about this little limerick spouter?
I didn't like this canto didn't particularly stick with me at the time I read it. Um I mean, like I said, there is quite a lot of strange stuff in the middle here.
Hmm. Well, it's
Uh,
I mean, to my mind, right? It's all the more bleak for its momentary levity, right? Because Jacob, you mentioned limericks, and this is because like unique, I think it's the only one written this way. There may be another. Unique among the whole length of this text is written in amphibrachic pentameter or amphibrachic. I forget how to
yeah,
pronounce that.
it's
Um, Generally used in limericks.
Mm.
yeah, like this has a very different cadence to it from most of this.
Right.
Uh,
A very
Most of what comes both before and after.
right, right. Generally recognized from like more comedic and lighthearted sort of fare.
Yeah.
And yeah, the arch comic is just like the god emperor of all comedians.
Yeah.
And uh
Yeah, it says, we howled when he entered on stage with his three-legged car. Our thanks was a howl, and he answered right back with a blar. But everything falls to the grave, which adores J.D. Esprit.
Je
That art,
Jeu
d'esprit.
d'esprit.
yes, the arch comic Sandin was lost in the vast cosmic sea. Used up and worn down by the burdensome fortunes of man, the arch comic gave up his blar, filling out his lifespan. Rip
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sandin, he was a real one.
Yeah.
Uh,
Guy shows up, gives a blar, refuses to elaborate, dies.
you know else who shows up and refuses to elaborate? The spear. A spear shoots by their ship and just keeps going. What's up with that, folks? Anybody got any thoughts?
Yeah.
I
Oh yeah.
literally have no idea what this is supposed to be.
Well, because nobody on the ship knows what to make of
I
it.
mean, is it like a comet?
It describes it as a void spear.
Yeah.
And it's basically like the maybe my least favorite part of the movie is they make the spear into like a thing that they stop and they try and extract fuel from it and like that annoyed the shit out of me. Whatever.
Yeah.
I understand you need plot in this thing, whatever. Yeah, they have a vision of a spear that exceeded the rate of the goal donor. Uh, but it says, but afterwards we sat in groups for hours, speaking excitedly with one another about the spear, about its path and origin. But no one knew and nobody could know. Some tried to guess, but nobody believed. In some sense, it was not to be believed, lacked meaning as an object of belief. It was simply flying through the universe. The void spear moved along its pointless course. But nonetheless, this vision had the power to alter many people's brains. Three went mad, one was a suicide, still another started up a sect. A shrill, dry, tediously ascetic crew from whom Aniara long had much ado. So we were all struck by the spear head on. Um, and it feels another like sort of joke, like it's like this darkly comic moment, but it's also just like I think I don't know. This is this book's Tom Bombadil, but it's just like it's got
Yeah, there's a
seven
lot
Tom
of
Bomb.
Bombadil
Yeah,
moments.
seven Bombadils. But like the spear just zips on by and they're just like, oh yeah, I guess that's a thing. But right, but like something so small, imagine it how you will. If it's literally a spear, if it's a bit of rock, it's like the universe is so vast, any interaction with anything is incredibly improbable and is enough
Yeah.
to like start a fucking cult over, like
Yeah. And for
because you're
three people to go insane and want to kill themselves.
yeah. And I have to imagine, at a time where people are looking up, in the 50s and getting into the 60s, when people are looking up, obviously there's a lot of promise and hope and cool stuff, but it's like every little thing you find is gonna like drastically impact somebody somewhere. Uh,
Yeah.
I
I,
like to imagine that the spear is the drone craze of its day. That's
I
gonna
do.
date when this episode
Yeah,
comes out.
it's the
Okay,
Chinese
I
weather
must be
balloon.
I must be like completely I this is one of those social media things that I've missed because I've seen memes about like people shooting down planes and like people being afraid of drones, but I completely missed the inciting incident of this.
Nora, that's because you're not a based patriot. Yeah, yeah, real patriots fight the drones. There we have I forget his name. A representative in Congress claimed there is an Iranian mothership off the coast of New England, and I'm not kidding. Uh, and
Beautiful.
that'll
I mean,
and now Chuck Schumer has
the
introduced
sheer level
legislation.
of projection here, right?
So cool. Yeah, no, if Iran had drones, they would not bother. Yeah, we would all right. They would do what they needed to do. Like drones like that, like holy shit, like a mothership, but whatever.
Hmm.
We're dating when this episode comes out. If you're listening to this in like a year, or maybe that'll be the only issue of the Trump administration. I'd like that. They dropped the trans stuff,
He will
they
spend
dropped the race stuff,
his entire
hunting down
political
drones.
career fighting the drones. Yeah.
And so yeah,
I mean,
that's
honestly, that would be one of the least bad things he could do,
no, I'm all for
Hmm.
it.
I
I,
feel like.
I bring up the drones not to just riff on current events though, but because it's an example of like something happens and because you're in such a weird state already, you latch onto it and turn it into a thing.
Yeah.
The last thing that makes like a suburban housewife on pills just lose it. And in this case, that's the drones. And in this case, it's like, these people just they don't got their Mima, they don't got their
Hmm.
show.
Yeah.
They look out, they see a fucking void spear, and they're like, I guess I'll kill myself. Like,
I mean,
I
I
don't know.
feel like this actually, it strikes me just now. This isn't something I particularly thought about as I read it, But it strikes me just now that or this poem has quite a few things to say about COVID and quarantine.
No doubt.
Oh, let's unpack that. Yeah.
No, just the way that, like the way that it deals with how humans behave in isolation,
Hmm.
I also think,
and in particular the sort of weird dynamic where people are isolating in groups,
mhm.
which is not really something that was possible to do at this time.
I also
But
think it's
like because of the cultural dominance of the internet became a thing during COVID.
I also think it's like experiencing trauma, right? Like, first of all, the
Mm,
trappedness, but also the trauma of literally the violence that occurs beyond your borders, watching the nuke
yeah,
was a lot of obviously that doesn't count if, you were working in the medical profession or you're like me or whatever.
of course.
But like for a lot of people, uh, experiencing the trauma removed from them, right? Watching this mass death unfold, knowing it could touch you or someone you care about or does, but you are just sitting there with your thoughts in isolation. There is a real like pandemic vibe to this
Yeah,
book that you make a good point.
Hmm.
yeah,
Because
And people did a lot, got real weird during COVID, and they never got back to normal.
that's true. Like
yeah,
even within the context of everybody being trapped and looking at the spear and like taking what they will from it, like there are people who are like, okay, but those guys are like even weirder, right? You know, the people who start up the cult are like, what is it? A shrill, dry, tediously ascetic crew from whom Aniara long had much ado. Like, yeah, those guys started a cult and they were the weird ones. Um, I did the very next one actually picks back up
Yes,
the
I was gonna say
antibrasis.
the same thing. The 54 is actually in the same meter as the high comic.
Yeah,
But it has a very different. It's very different in content, though.
yeah, I think it's the flip side of because the Arch comic stand-in is kind of funny, but the flip side of that I think is that you don't need a comic to come in and like make fun of like the situation because it already parodies itself, right? Like here, like you
Yeah,
have you have Chiffon or I haven't pronounced his name, him and the rest of the High Command just retreating into this medieval like high fantasy fantasia.
yeah. So this
Uh,
is.
The fact that
Appa-
Chiffon hasn't gotten overthrown is wild to me. You'd think they would
yeah, and he
they would
doesn't.
get rid of this guy, but they're just kind of like, yeah, that's the guy. Which that probably says something
I mean,
about
that says a lot, I think, about the
everything.
Swedish character, if nothing else. Like
like
Yeah,
there's
just
we are very much like the Germans that way.
yeah, somebody ought to do something about this guy. And then nobody
Yeah,
does. I feel that. That's felt here as well.
yeah,
Um,
no.
there's like a space in the Anyara, as in like other Goldanders we are led to believe that is like a greenhouse, like a green space,
Yeah,
like set
which
aside,
makes
I guess.
sense
Hmm.
you'd need
in
that
and
for the
of
air.
itself. Yeah,
They explain it in the movie,
and to
algae
grow
and
food.
shit. But yeah. Um, and I like that, like, yeah, as it's getting increasingly insane, they're like, who do we blame? But it says now it's over. No one's left to blame. The men in charge are all dead, and the instigators fled in time. Um, the tools of power that maintained the whole thing with fireproof hand turned glaze and ashes. Everything that could burn turned to ash, and stones were vitrified down to a 4-inch depth. In certain regions, it went deeper, a molten foot or more of granite surface boiled, but no one had to look. All had whirled off earlier, round and round as floated ash. Um, so it is also now this realization that like there is going to be no justice either, right?
Yeah,
Like increasing levels of you know, okay, I'm going to die here. Okay, now where I came from is dead. Okay, now I can't experience where I came from. Okay, now there is, yeah, like several levels, and now the acceptance of, and like there's not some cosmic significance to this. Like it's not like, oh, well, we learned a lesson or oh, we whatever. Like something I did enjoy from the movie is you have Chiffon get up on at the 20 like third year anniversary or 20th anniversary. He stands up and says, think about this. We're the furthest into space any humans have been. Let's give a round of applause. And just
Mm.
everyone is just looks like they want to kill him. It's like that. Like what meaning or justice or even like irony are we gonna assign to this? This is just a thing that fucking happened to us.
Yeah.
And the people who did this are either dead or they got away with it. Um, it feels bad.
Yeah.
It
No.
sucks. Um, not the writing, but the to experience it. And they experience all kinds of stuff. And I mean, we could get into all kinds of different things, but they really do
Mm.
just at this point start to have full breakdowns, including Isabel. It says in 88, the
Yes.
splendid mind of Isabel broke down. A fevered demon rose into her eyes. The pupil dilated to the wellspring of her soul. She heard appeals and echoes from far skies. She spoke to me about a voice that hailed her by a name that she had never heard. And often its appeal had wailed and wailed in Mima's chambers since the first occurred. Um, it came from Mima's grave, and while all slept, one night she listened to that voice exhort, and to the tiles that marked that grave she crept. They're a herald from the eternal court. So, the ghost of Mima basically possessing Isabel, not literally, but in madness, and Isabel becomes like a Souls NPC, like for the
Yeah.
and like everybody does basically
Mhm.
at the end here.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, yeah. As we get towards the 80s and 90s, things start to happen again.
There's a really weird bit in 73 that's like the secret dirge of Libidella set to that Bicycle Built for Two song. Like, which is an interesting connection because like I've seen comparisons of the Mima to basically like a pre-HAL 9000 I've seen it described as like
I
from
disagree though.
yeah.
I because the how 9000 there's like a malicious element to that, and also is like self-consciously directing the ship. The Mima is just
Yeah.
a reflection of
Yeah,
themselves
like the
and what they
Mima
want to
isn't
see.
the Mima isn't like the ship's computer in the sense that we would understand it now.
Right.
I also think even if it was like even if it like did with calculations or whatever, the fact that it doesn't like it's not like imparting its will on them. It imparts its will once to destroy itself. But aside from
Yeah.
that, it's just showing them what they want to see.
Mm.
Um, so I think the art comparison is more apt. Now, I'm not saying that like no science fiction writer has ever
Yeah.
been,
No.
picked up on this and turned it into something else. But I think the connection, I literally, when I started this based on like my bias, was like, oh, the Mima's going to turn evil, but it never does. Now, people do evil shit in the like room where the Mima was, but
Well,
like,
Yeah.
exactly. Right. The Mima doesn't need to turn evil because we already have us.
yes. The the Mima is dead, or the Mima is empty. All the devils are here. I don't know. I don't have anything.
Yeah, so actually you mentioning 73 does make me want to bring up 72, which
Mm.
is kind of a weird. I mean, it has a weird position in this because, as I mentioned before, basically every hint we get of what Earth is like in this world is about something sort of deeply fictional.
Hmm.
But 72 is titled "The Song of Corellia," which
Yeah,
is
which
a
is a real
real
place.
place.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
planet from Star Wars.
yeah, exactly.
It's where Han Solo's from.
Yeah, and apparently it's also where the Mima robe is from.
Hmm.
And this song basically reads. I mean, it's kind of like a stereotypical, like Finnish banditry story.
Mm.
Like he falls in love with a woman, and his her father doesn't approve, so he ends up killing her with a knife,
Hmm.
and then runs away and becomes the Mima robe.
Hmm.
So the Mima robe is canonically Finnish.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
Uh,
Why not?
Well, and that's interesting because like if I'm unless I'm much mistaken, like didn't Martinson and Moa travel through Karelia to get to that writers conference in Moscow?
they
Like
would have had to, more or less,
I
yeah.
seem to remember Moa saying that yeah, we almost killed each other in Karelia. It was bad.
Yeah, no, that would track, yeah.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
so by this time the Karelian Finnish ASSR was also being run by a native Swedish speaking Finnish communist
Hmm.
for some reason.
Interesting. Well, at this point, the ship itself is starting to fail. Um,
Yes.
it says in 96, the High Command can no more keep concealed the swift approach of cataclysmic days. Not that it like super matters at this point. Um, and our main character went to Mima's grave and there laid a sprawl. I lay at prayer, who knows to which divinity. In my despair, I begged in that cold hall a miracle from that dead circuitry. And then, although no outward sign I spied, I heard that circuitry in silence utter a mysterious deep and mutely magnified by the lights of Mima's grave about to gutter. But it doesn't, the character maybe is insane, maybe not, but there is nothing, just this spark of the Mima, basically.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, in 97, it says in the beginning of the 24th year, thought broke down and fantasy died out.
Oh yeah.
Um, and then we have several like quick chapters. Uh,
Yeah.
and he's
Yeah.
just
The songs
crying.
get short towards the end.
He's crying. He wants Isabel to come back
Um,
to life.
yeah. So
Um,
I should mention that in '87, the Mima Robe uh, goes to see Isabel and discovers that she is planning to drive the ship into a star.
oh yeah, there was a moment where she almost did that. Yes.
How shall
Yeah.
we, dearest? Should we? Yes or no?
Yeah.
I answered that the time was surely right, but space was still an open-ended game. We therefore might be wise to keep them off some distance for the moment from the flame, now offering itself as our cremator. And Isagal left everything at that, but yet her eyes appeared to phosphoresce in anger, which at such an hour was holy. Behind the backs of our benumbed cohort, she spared Aniara from that last resort. It's interesting to me that it comes back to her eyes, because like very early on, like our first impression of Isagal is like her looking at the Mima and like her eyes coming away changed because of that, right? And now
Yeah.
it's in response to the narrator saying, "Hey, maybe don't go into a sun," right?
Yeah.
So he, like it or not, he's usurped that position where he's basically steering the whole ship, as it were.
And
And
Yeah.
yeah,
yeah,
keeps them alive, but like not for much longer because Isabel goes the way of the souls NBC and just kind of fades. Everybody goes kind of crazy, and then at the very end, they're just sitting in the ruins of the Mima room, just kind of like, okay, yeah, the ship, we're about to run into something that just ends us.
Yeah.
Um, I think 102, it says. I'd meant to make them an Edenic place, but since we left the one we had destroyed, our only home became the night of space, where no God heard us in the endless void. The firmament's eternal mystery and wondrous physics of the constellations are law, but they are not the gospel truth. Compassion flourishes at life's foundations. We crashed into the law's precise command and found our death, empty death in Mima's dens, the God whom we had hoped for to the end sat wounded and profaned in Doric Glen. And in the very last paragraph of the book says, around the Mima's grace we sprawled in rings, fallen and to guiltless ashes changed, delivered from the stars' embittered strings, and through us all Nirvana's current ranged. So,
what have we learned?
Yeah. They all sit down in the Mima Hall and listen to "Smells Like Teen Spirit" together.
yes, that's
Mm.
exactly what happens. They do. I mean, I don't need to say that it's a bleak ending.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it kind of couldn't be any other way, I think.
I'd have been mad if they had like been like, "Wait, we found the
Yeah.
accelerator." Yeah, that would have been
Yeah.
dumb.
That would have been strange.
Yeah. Uh, what are our
There's
takeaways here? Don't
man.
bomb Dorisville first. I think that's
Yeah. Yeah.
I was going to say like there's one last reference to Doris, right? You know, like the fact of like this fleeting human connection with the receptionist ending up becoming the synecdoche for like Earth itself, right? For this planet that
Yeah.
we've
I mean, I
left.
don't know if Doris is the receptionist.
I like in the notes, it says Doris, the earth to which Harry Martinson gives the name of a district of ancient Greece lying to the north of Mount Parnassus. The name would thus express both the natural and intellectual beauty found upon the earth. Only in poem one is the name applied to a person. And that's what Lenore is
Oh,
referring
yeah,
to.
right.
So, like, I think this receptionist's name is Doris, and she also just lives in Dorisville. Um, but I guess Harry
Yeah.
Martinson really likes this little part in Greece. No, I don't know. I think it's a name that like connected for him and could also be the name of a
Yeah.
person.
I
But
mean,
it
I
is,
think I think people
yeah.
have overanalyzed this.
hmm Yeah, I
It's
mean, I found
Uh,
interpretations of it online, and none of them were like particularly convincing to me. That doesn't
yeah.
mean they're right or wrong, but it just like kind of is, you know?
if I could
Yeah.
overanalyze it a little bit more, though,
Go for it.
the you blink and you miss Doris the receptionist, but she recurs again and again in, Doris Grove here at the end, Doris
Yeah.
Wald, Dorisville, all these constructions of her name that come to represent where they came from. This fleeting
Yeah.
interaction that ends up having this import. And I think part of the tragedy here is that like when you're going through space in as in Canto 82, when you're in space for 20 years and you realize just how little distance you've covered, right? It takes 20 years to go 16 hours of light travel. Like a light year is a grave, it
Yeah.
says, right? When you're in this space and you're isolated and your god, the Mima, has died, and you're reduced to building cults and creating ritual out of everyday things and mining, the sexisms of like treating somebody as a fertility idol until she gets older, right?
Yeah.
Mining like
Yeah.
ethnic tensions of there being Xenombrans whose like city you blew up once upon a time and you're fighting with them, right? To keep from going mad, you have to mine everything around you, the smallest detail for ritual, for import, right? Which itself becomes a kind of madness. And once upon a time, you could just meet somebody and just forget they existed. And like, I think that's what Doris represents, right? To have the luxury of forgetting. And now you can't.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. I don't think he ever says how many people are on the ship.
A
Yeah,
few
like
Does he?
thousand, something
Oh,
like
okay.
that.
Yeah. Yeah, but like this is like a small town basically.
Yeah,
hmm
basically.
And these people have spent 20 years plus by the end of it in only each other's company. So obviously they can't get away from each other.
hmm
hmm
And you can't really develop, right? You can't build something new. You can't
Hmm.
iterate on, what culture there is because culture, what is culture on Aniara, but increasingly, retrograde like iterations on um, ancient fertility cults
Well, culture is
and
turning literal mirrors to face you. Yeah, it is,
yes,
you are
exactly.
just looking
Yeah.
at yourself again a
Mm,
thousand times. And then your
Yeah.
fertility goddess is no longer a baddie. And then what are you gonna do? You gotta give up. I gotta
This
ask.
is a known situation, yeah.
It says this has happened before. I have to ask if a receptionist had that level of effect on him, you have to ask, what would have happened if he had seen a jogger as he was taking off?
Oh,
It would have been fucking over.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Joggersville.
I think Harry Martinson had some issues with the sumo inside him.
No fucking doubt. Yeah, he needs to be careful about that. But
you get to like the planet you're going to at long last and just
Rip
like Mr.
Harry
Sex Drive
Martinson,
is
you would have
there.
loved every young man's battle.
I'm sure.
He just like cracks his knuckles. He's like, "Welcome to your new planet. Start jerking it."
Yes. That
Oh,
that's hey, if you get to land, just it said the mines. It didn't say what they were mining.
oh, oh, oh
Clock
my.
in,
The
clock in.
goon caves of the tundra
The
sphere.
the Coon Caves of Mars.
Yeah.
Oh Lord.
The goon caves of steel.
The guarantee of the socialist shelf is I know that no one has ever made a Harry Martinson Fred Stoker comparison before today. It is the
No,
first time it has ever
I
happened.
mean, Martinson himself
absolutely.
worked as a stoker.
Fuck. Yeah.
God damn it.
So
Uh,
while we're on the topic of sexism, do we want to talk about Daisy Duty?
Yeah, what's her? So I like her. slang, first of all, right?
Yes, the slang is one of these things that always get mentioned. It's not really. I mean, I don't know what the significance of it is, but it is there.
Daisy is just this woman that comes from this area that he is from, that has a similar dialect, knows the similar culture.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it
yeah.
is
She's
his
she's also from Dorisburg, and she speaks in like the local slang,
yeah. So it's
which like the
idea of like the meme.
implication is that's a style of language that is
Sure.
on its way out even before they left, and
And the Mima is
obviously
gone,
with
so
the
there is no
destruction of Dorisburg.
Well,
right.
and
The
I'm
Mima
Uh,
is gone. There's no other reflection of it except this
yeah,
woman. Um,
yeah.
curious about how like lines like, okay, like you're gamming out and getting vile and snowsy, but do like me, I never sit and frowsy. I'm curious how that reads in Swedish.
So I can read the whole bit.
go
Yeah.
for it.
Du gammar ner dig och blir gäll och dorig, men gör som jag sitter aldrig lorig. Här slumrar ingen Chadwick puta Daisy. Jag rös i gaden, jag är vlam och gondel. Min deide gander och min fejde rondel. Och vept i taris, gland i deld och jondel.
And
So I
lustus
don't know how much of that
beard.
actually made it through. I think this is one of the few areas where they really change it up.
Some of it I heard, like she says, I'm no sleeping Chadwick, my pipes are working, I'm flamming gondole. So some of it I think was just brought straight
Yeah,
across.
yeah,
Things they didn't feel like, yeah, they just wanted to bring through because it
Mm.
works talking about the words of it. But I think like Daisy connects well kind of to this, because obviously we're towards the end here, this overall
yeah.
plot as this like main character is kind of an outlet that he is seeking out
I mean,
of
she
anything.
she represents innocence, right?
Yes,
Mhm.
Yeah, I mentioned that Isabel is like one end of the sort of spectrum of femininity, and I think Daisy is the other end.
sure. She dies due to a
Uh,
literal shattering, like a literal shattering
yeah,
of glass. Like innocence is actually shattered on
yeah,
Aniara. And I think it connects well because it's like this is another futile and self-consciously futile attempt to escape like the now.
yeah,
And I also think as like a Martinson, like as a guy who had a famously failed marriage, it's like, this is an attempt to escape myself. This is whatever. And then this doesn't work,
yeah,
or this person dies or goes away. And then I'm doing this, and then I'm doing this. And ultimately, none of it is going to pay off because of the big stuff. The little stuff,
yeah,
actually, there is no little escape from the big thing. You are all just kind of waiting for the shoe to drop. Um,
Mhm.
so I think as we kind of bring it to an end here, my case I would like to make is let's not let the shoe drop. No nukes.
We could simply not do this.
Yeah. Donald Trump, if you're listening to this podcast, don't nuke anyone. I
Yeah,
know
no,
you're a
I'm
big
sure.
fan.
I'm sure no one has told these people that they could simply not.
Yeah. That's I mean, I don't know literally if there is a lesson from this that is not just pure cynicism. It is like, hey, let's not destroy art because we actually and beauty because we actually have the capacity to, right? There's, because
Yeah,
there's a lot of media and art and stuff about like art and beauty transcending violence and destruction. And that's always
Mhm.
cool and beautiful. And this even has moments of it with like not with like Nabi or whatever. But ultimately, destruction, fire, violence, the bomb has the capacity to destroy these things, to obliterate
yeah.
these things, to take them away from us. And it is up to us to not employ these things because there is no like magic reason that,
There is no protection for mankind.
yeah,
Mhm.
there's no magic reason that these things have to persist. The Mima can be destroyed by the bomb. We must
Yeah,
self-consciously keep it from doing so, if there is any political lesson here.
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
And personal lesson. Don't
to
don't shatter the beauty in your own life either. Because
yeah,
you can.
to the degree that he like depicts authority here, like the High Council of like commanders that Chiffon is on, like the cults, like it's all insular, right? It's all backward
Yeah, it's
looking.
kind of a thing separate from
Yeah.
everything else.
High
Yeah,
Yeah.
command, appointed before this thing even took off.
Right. And
yeah,
of course, like the subordination of art to that goes in, very, very authoritarian and regressive directions in the
Yeah,
text.
and
But
I
I mean,
think it's really interesting. Like, this is one of those things that, 10, 15 years ago, we would have said marked this down as like a product of its time. But
right.
I think it's interesting that, like, this work doesn't see like political modernity as a positive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
That, like,
doesn't
he
really.
he sees sort of authoritarianism and like overreaching powers as being a part of the modernizing process.
Yeah, and doesn't really see doesn't really see a way through to a politics that is broad and inclusive and seeks to draw the
Yeah,
masses entire into their own governance, right?
I mean, and
absolutely. Yeah.
also exists at the same time as like an escalating Cold War and coming off the heels of war in Eastern Europe.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, we can relate a little bit.
Mhm.
Yeah,
It
yeah, no,
seems.
absolutely.
So yeah, really enjoyed this book, and Max, really appreciate you bringing it to us. Appreciate you coming on.
Well,
Uh,
thanks.
and you have any final thoughts, and also tell us any projects you want to plug here to our listeners.
Uh, I don't have anything I'm particularly like anything that is ready to be viewed
I
or
got
that
you.
is in English. Yeah.
Mm.
Fair enough.
Which
Well,
is
if
always
you
going to be the issue.
well, if you do speak Swedish, we will link your projects in your social
Yeah.
media in the episode description here, and give it a follow anyway. If you're trying to learn Swedish, what's a better way
Yeah,
than
no, fuck.
um. But we do seriously greatly appreciate you coming on, and yeah, introducing this to me to this thing that I probably would not have just found on my own otherwise. Uh,
Yeah.
so very
Yeah,
cool.
it's
Unless I
we've
ended up at an exoplanet, Isagel, and looked up where that came from.
I mean,
Yeah.
we're coming at this right on the heels of Every Young Man's Battle, right?
Yeah.
We have done a
As you
few
may have
times
noticed.
we have done a few times on this show now, evangelical texts that like Jacob, you and like Josh and Brian like would have grown up grappling with, right? And are unpacking now, but which I went through my whole life just not being aware of their stature or their, their fell influence on the world, so to come to Harry Martinson, who I had no idea about, and to appreciate his work, to find something of like genuine artistic merit that I had never encountered before, that's I appreciate stumbling across a diamond.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say at the end. So obviously, we've got a number. Not I don't know about in Sweden, but we've got a number of European listeners. Not as many as North American, but European listeners, and that one guy in Hong Kong. Um,
Yeah.
Shout out to that one guy in Hong Kong if you're still listening. And I have to say, last year, at the top of the year, we did announce the year of Lenore, of course. 2025, we've not announced what year it's going to be yet. But I do have a really exciting announcement at the close here. Since we're, branching out into Europe, I think it's important that we announce the Union of Socialist Shelf Republics um, will be debuting in 2025. So watch this space. Max, you're hearing this for the first time, but yeah, there is going to be a USSR, but don't worry, it's we the Patriots are in control. Me and Lenore
Real
got this.
Soviet patriots in control.
Real Soviet Patriots in control. We will be coming in. We're gonna have to refer to you to figure out what y'all's challenges are, but I'm sure we can figure it
The
out.
first, the first virtual Soviet republic located entirely on the blockchain.
Yeah, it's
God
gonna
damn,
be connected to that
that
magic
sounds
cryptocurrency.
that sounds like some Cory Doctorow shit right there. Oh
Oh
my God.
man.
Well, as always, appreciate everyone for listening. And y'all have a lovely day.
Happy
Peace.
holidays.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.